FBI and the DOJ are both investigating the shooting death of an 18-year-old in St. Louis, Missouri, or I should say near St. Louis, Missouri, in Ferguson, which is a smaller town. Now, Ferguson police are also doing their own investigation of this shooting, and of course there are differing accounts based on eyewitness testimony and what the police say that they experienced last Saturday night. So let me give you the details. I want to start off with Dorian Johnson. Dorian Johnson was the young man who was with Michael Brown, the person who was shot and killed by police, on the night that everything went down. And here's what he says. Dorian Johnson told WALB-TV that he and Brown were walking home from a convenience store when a police officer told them to get out of the street and onto the sidewalk. Johnson said that they kept walking, which caused the officer to confront them from his car and again after getting out of his car. The officer exchanged words with the two teens before choking Brown and trying to pull him onto the squad car. The officer, he said, then exited his car, fired a shot, and chased after Brown, who was running for his life. Johnson also said that the officer fired and he and Brown were scared and ran away. And to give you a direct statement from Dorian Johnson, he said, he shot again, and once my friend felt that shot, he turned around and put his hands in the air and he started to get down. But the officer still approached with his weapon drawn and he fired several more shots. We wasn't causing harm to nobody. We had no weapons on us at all. And so it is important to keep in mind that authorities have absolutely no footage or surveillance of this incident. As of now, there's no dash cam footage. The officers do have the technology to wear cameras on themselves. However, they haven't utilized that technology yet. So they don't have any footage, and it's a little bit of a he said, she said incident. Now, the police officer who did shoot has not been identified, and he gives a completely different account, which I'll get to in just a second.
It's hard to know without being there, of course, right? And both sides are going to have an incentive to say it went down in a certain way. But you can tell through context who was right and who was wrong. First of all, of course, the cops are going to want to defend themselves and say they were in mortal danger. Otherwise, why execute a kid who's got his hands up and is not armed, right? So they're going to be leaning in that direction, and obviously you have to take that with a grain of salt. The other guy who was involved in this is going to want to lean it in his direction. But the flip side is there are facts. They were not armed. Mm-hmm. No one disputes that, right? They were not in the middle of a crime. No one disputes that. So the cops felt a little disrespected, so then they're trying to throw him into the cop car, and then all this assault begins, and then the guns come out, as we've seen so often. And plus, there are witnesses. Now, you might say, oh, the witnesses are from the community. Yeah, they're from the community. So for example, if there was some bad guys in the area who were threatening the community, and the cops came in, they'd be like, oh, thank God the cops are here, mm-hmm. right? And so I don't think that they have an incentive to lie against the cops when they see that the kid had put his hand up. I mean, why make up that lie? They're not going to get anything out of that. So when you put it all in context, it's of course all preliminary. It's happened very recently. Mm-hmm. But right now, it doesn't look good for the cops. It looks like they might have killed another unarmed black teen as he was walking home from a grocery store because, no, he didn't dare. They made the critical, in this case, fatal mistake of not listening to cops' orders immediately, whether they made sense or they didn't make sense.
Yeah. Now, from what the cop says, there is a little gap in his story, which I'll get to. But apparently this police officer who did the shooting did speak to the St. Louis police chief, a man by the name of John Belmar. And this is what Belmar says. Belmar says that the officer had an encounter with the two individuals on the street. Belmar says as the officer tried to get out of his car, one of the subjects pushed him back in and began assaulting him. It is our understanding at this point in the investigation that there was a struggle over the officer's weapon. There was at least one shot fired within the car. Now, that very last part of the statement really upsets me because for anyone who stops reading at that point, they'll think that, oh, one of the teenagers, or one of the young men, I should say, must have been armed. They probably shot at the cop, but that's not the case. All of the shells were from the officer's gun. They were unarmed, as we mentioned earlier on in this segment.
So it's a cop shooting from within the car yes. at the guys who are outside. He does obviously couldn't tell if they were armed because they didn't have any weapons on them. You might want to step outside the car before you start shooting. Mm-hmm. I mean, that begins the shooting. It doesn't end the shooting, and then later we have, according to some accounts, the guy on his knees and with his hands up and still getting shot at several times.
And also, when I talk about the gap in the officer's story, how did it escalate to that point so quickly? What did you say to them? Why were they upset? How did it lead to a physical altercation, an alleged physical altercation based on your story? Now, there's more. Belmar says that the officer got out of the car and he shot Michael Brown about 35 feet from the vehicle.
Now, think about that. 35 feet away from the car. If there was an initial assault, in the best case scenario for the cops, right, that the cop pushed him into the car, as he says, right? Well, now the kid's 30, or the guy is 35 feet away. I mean, certainly there's a better answer for, and what is he, running away from you, so you shot him in the back? Or did he turn around, as the other guy involved in the incident say, and have his hands up, and you shot him anyway? You're certainly not in any mortal danger. You didn't see any weapons. There were no weapons. And you shot him when he was 35 feet away. And look, the other contextual clue here is the guy who Anna was quoting here, who was involved in the incident, they let him go immediately. You think if he assaulted the cops, he was in the middle of a serious crime, assaulted the cops, and that led to a death, that they'd let him go immediately?
If there was a struggle for the officer's weapon, would they let him go?
Come on, you know they wouldn't let him go. They might even charge him with felony murder. But it's obvious that the kids didn't do anything wrong based on these facts that we have now.
Right.
So this is very problematic for the cops. They say, don't worry, they're investigating themselves and everything will be fine. Now, to be fair, it's not that local jurisdiction. It's the county police that came in. The county police, there's a history in St. Louis, in the St. Louis area, that the county police sometimes come in and are called in for a reason because they happen to agree with the local cops a lot and say, oh, no, they were fine. But now, is the FBI involved?
The FBI and the Justice Department are both doing their separate investigations into this case. So that is good news. I'm glad that there are appropriate investigations taking place. But I think the more troubling aspect of this story is the fact that the police chief for St. Louis released this statement, and it implies that he already thinks that the cop who shot this 18-year-old is innocent. Let me give you his exact statement. He said, "I would not imagine that anyone would do that," and he's referring to the officer calling him after the shooting took place, would do that if they felt like they had anything to hide or, in fact, did not want the investigation to be looked at independently and then the facts and circumstances of that investigation be looked at by a neutral party. So I just think that it's interesting that he's implying there that, hey, you know what, he called me after the shooting took place. I mean, he wouldn't have called me if he was guilty of doing anything wrong. No, just do the investigation. Don't imply that he's probably innocent because he called you.
Yeah, well, he might have called you because he knows that the county police in the St. Louis area have the presumption that the other cops are always right. And you just proved it by, before starting the investigation, saying, oh, he's probably right. He's probably innocent. Otherwise, why would he call me? Because it's not the finest police work I've seen.
Now, I want to give you guys a little more context into the St. Louis area. Now, you'll hear anecdotal evidence about racial profiling among police officers toward the black community in the area. And recently, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch did release an op-ed where they addressed this issue, and I want to read you a part of it. They said last year, for the 11th time in 14 years, that data has been collected. The disparity index that measures potential racial profiling by law enforcement in the state got worse. Black Missourians were 66% more likely in 2013 to be stopped by police, and blacks and Hispanics were both more likely to be searched, even though the likelihood of finding contraband was higher among whites.
You know, and every time you'll still get people who believe in, let's say, stereotypes. I'm being as kind as I can. Turn around and say, well, I mean, if they got busted more, they probably had it coming. You see, it shows they're more likely to be criminals. No. As you saw there at the end, they're not. They're less likely, but they get searched and stopped and arrested so much more often. And here we go again. And so that's why the community gets enraged.
Yes.
Because because it's not in your experience, but in their experience, they have lived with this their whole lives, and they're tired of it.